Today, what I will do is I will try to cover three key topics from the industry cloud common layer, which are specifically OmniStudio, Action Plan, and Arc. Okay, and I think OmniStudio is very well known. Most of the people knows OmniStudio and they have dealt with it. I think Action Plan and Arc are very nice tool, I would say, which are very easy to implement, but they give really good business value and a lot of brownie points for your business. Okay, so once we will look at those opportunities, we will see what are those. Okay, brief introduction from my side. I think Abdul already introduced briefly about me. My name is Anand Khambete. I'm a senior architect at Capgemini. Okay, around 21 years of total experience. I'm also a certified technical architect, and I'm 18 times Salesforce certified. Currently, I'm living in a small town outside Antwerp in Belgium, which we call it as Artselar. And I'm living with my wife and one daughter here. And from weather perspective, Belgium, winter is coming. This time it's a bit late, but yeah, I hope that from next week, winter is there. This is my LinkedIn post, so happy to connect with you on LinkedIn and network. So please feel free to send me connection on the LinkedIn network. Okay, so on the agenda. So today, basically what we will do is that first we will start with what is Salesforce Industries, and then we will zoom into the common layer. And in that common layer, specifically, we will be talking about three aspects: OmniStudio, Action Plan, and Arc. Okay. So for this zoom in process, what I have used is basically something I call it as satellite to chicken zooming. So we start with a satellite view, and we will see how a chicken eye basically sees a common layer in Salesforce industry. So we will start with a very wider scope of Salesforce as a whole, and then we will zoom into specific topic, and then we will see what are these three common layers. Then we'll start with OmniStudio. And I have some slides for OmniStudio from a theory perspective. And I think Kid and Abdul asked me to basically go into the detail, and then I was debating myself. Should I have 100 slides about OmniStudio and bore you with those OmniStudio? But then I thought I think better idea would be to give you some basic understanding of OmniStudio to start with, where we will have some basic theory so that if you don't know OmniStudio, this will give you a good idea of what OmniStudio is. But then what we will do is that we will directly go into an org and we will start dissecting an OmniScript data mapper and an integration procedure. These are three key components of OmniStudio, and this is what we will dissect. So I have taken a use case, I've created an OmniScript for that, and we will go into each component in detail for that particular OmniScript and see what are those components, how those are configured, and yeah, what are the best practices from an implementation point of view. Okay. Then after that, I also have a slide for best practices from my personal experience point of view. So you can get a lot of best practices when you Google, but I think the slide which I tried to make was, I think, just 5 or 6 points. But those 5 or 6 points are practically from my experience. What are my key takeaways from what I have implemented OmniStudio? So those will be the best practices we will cover after the dissecting. And then we will deep dive into action plan. And again, same philosophy, we will go into the org, look at the action plan template, how those are configured, and what are some of the best practices and learnings from my point of view. Okay. And at the end, we will cover ARC, which is Actionable Relationship Center. It's a very nice visualization tool given by Industry Cloud. And we will see theoretically what it is, and then we will again look at a practical example going into the org. Okay. So that will be the agenda for next 1.5 hours. And then at the end, we will have question and answer. As Abdul mentioned, I would prefer to have Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, start putting them on the chat. And then at the end, whatever time is left, we will try to answer those questions during the session. Okay. So let's zoom into the industry cloud, right? So let's start with the satellite view. So what I call it as a satellite view where you see Salesforce as a whole, right? So this is kind of a very latest and complete picture I could get from Salesforce because it keeps evolving. And you know, right, I mean, every 6 months or 8 months, I mean, they keep adding products into the Salesforce, right? So it is no more a CRM platform at all. I mean, it has become a customer success platform as a whole because it has wide variety of products. Okay, and at the top of this diagram, you could see the actually the most said out word in last 2 months if you are in a Salesforce ecosystem, right, which is Agentforce. Of course, I mean, everyone is talking about Agentforce, which has to come up in one of your slides as the key accelerators, which is basically built on your core models, core clouds, which are sales, service, and so on. And there are various clouds at that point of view, which are built on top of your Salesforce platform in collaboration with very strong product, which is Data Cloud, which is injecting data into various clouds on Agentforce. Okay, so that's like a satellite view of your Salesforce landscape as a whole, and where does industry and Salesforce Industries resides, and what will be our key focus area for today is the Salesforce Industries, which is one of the key and important areas of Salesforce in last couple of years. A lot of customers have evolved towards industry clouds to standardize their business and technical solution. Okay, so that's on a very high level satellite view. Now from satellite view, let's move to a flight view, okay, which is basically going into the detail of the industry cloud. Okay, and this how can I get rid of this? Okay, so basically from a flight view, you can see that this Salesforce Industry Cloud are nothing but various clouds built for specifically for your domain or industry. Okay, and these are built natively on the Salesforce platform. So they use the power of Salesforce platform, but they also give you the power of your industry or domain knowledge collaborated with your Salesforce technology. Okay. So for specifically for industries like communication cloud, health cloud, government cloud, there are specific clouds which you can leverage, which increases your time to market, faster time to market, and also it increases your scalability and maintainability from future perspective because you're standardizing your processes and standardizing your core data model. So these are some of the industry clouds which are present and which will keep evolving in future, I'm sure, from Salesforce point of view. But some of the key ones are communication cloud, financial cloud, government cloud is one which is getting adopted a lot, and of course health cloud is one of the key ones. Now from satellite we went to the flight view, and now from flight view let's move into a bird's eye view where we will see how a specific Salesforce industry is basically layered and approached. Okay, so in this you can see that the Salesforce industry is basically layered approach, and that's I think one of the strength of Salesforce Industries is that it is built on native Salesforce platform. So you get all these strength and abilities of your Salesforce platform. And in the Salesforce industry layer, it has specifically on a very simplistic view, 3 layers which are built on your industry or domain specific. The core one is your specific industry specific data model, which is very specific to your domain or your industry. Okay, so you get a lot of out of the box objects and which are aligned with standard industry practices. For example, for communication cloud, TM Forum has its own data model, right? So you need to basically start following that to make your solution and your industry or your product more scalable and maintainable from future perspective. So it gives you that edge towards other companies. So that's the whole industry layer, which is based out on top of this data model. And then comes the Salesforce Industries Common Layer, which is built on top of this data model. So this Industries Common Layer are nothing but it is set of tools which are basically common across various industries, which gives you or basically a very configurable way of accelerating your implementation and providing business value to your customers. So those Industries Common Layer tools like there are business rule engines, OmniStudio, action plans, and so on, right? So there are various common layer tools which are available across industries and which can be used across industries to provide business value. Today we will only focus on the 3 which I mentioned already. And on top of this industry common layer, we are specifically having very industry specific pre-built applications, and these pre-built applications are specific to your domain. So if you are, for example, working on communication cloud or a health cloud or a public sector government cloud, you are going to get some pre-built applications specifically for your domain, which you can reuse, and you don't have to build them from scratch. You can just take those applications, tweak them or configure a bit, and then you are ready for your customer to provide that business value. So it really gives you an edge rather than starting from a scratch on a specific Salesforce platform. And also it gives you a standardized way of doing it. Otherwise, if you do it on a Salesforce, the chances are that you are going to create a lot of technical depth and create a lot of customization. So that's the beauty of Salesforce Industries. So now we started with sales satellite view, we went to flight and the bird's eye view. Now let's zoom into a specific Salesforce industry cloud and see how that looks like. So I have taken an example of a public sector industry cloud solution, and this is a very simplistic architecture or a diagram of a public sector industry cloud. There are many other components apart from this, but because we wanted to just focus on these three, I just took a specific layer or very crux of all the three layers to show you what are the different components there. For example, here you see in a public sector industry cloud, you would get certain objects like case proceedings, case participants, because uh, in public sector there are a lot of parties which are involved in the whole business process. Those are called case participants in public sector. Okay, and that's one of the key objects from public sector. So once you start implementing this, the biggest feedback I have is that start using those data model or the object from public from your industry cloud, and if they are not providing the right solution for your business, then go for the custom objects. Okay, so that's the data model. Common layer, as I mentioned, there are many more, but we will be today focusing on these three: OmniStudio, Action Plan, and Visualizations Arc. And these three we will go into the details. And on top of this common layer, there are specific pre-built applications like benefit management, investigative case management for your court cases, and so on, grant management. So these are different components or different modules of your public sector which you can leverage for specific use cases for your government cloud. On top of this, what I felt, or I'm confident that Salesforce is also going to come up with a lot of agents via Agentforce for specific to your industry cloud. So every industry cloud will have pre-built autonomous or semi-autonomous Agentforce agents built on this industry specific pre-built application, so that you can start leveraging those Agentforce agents automatically without creating them from scratch. So those are, I think, in process, and I'm sure that in next 2 to 3 months we will see a good amount of those Agentforce autonomous agents available here. Okay, so that's kind of the zoom in view from your Salesforce industry as a whole to the industry common layer. And now let's deep dive into these three topics individually in detail. Okay, so we'll start with OmniStudio. But before I go into the OmniStudio, I just wanted to cover, because in Salesforce we have different solutions, right, to provide your user experience or custom screens. Okay, why OmniStudio and why not other solutions? So here, if you see in this graph, I just try to present based on your effort and complexity and your flexibility or your user experience which you want to give to a business. These are some of the solutions which you should leverage. On the top, on the bottom left, you see the configuration, which nothing but is your, either you use page layouts or you use now the dynamic forms or lighting pages, those configuration way of providing UI screens to your users. My bottom line or guideline to my team is always start with that configuration. If you can provide business value or provide a solution to your business problem using the first bottom left part, we should of course go with it. Why? Because it is the less effort, less complexity, but also it's easy to maintain from feature perspective. As you go towards the right, the effort goes high and your maintenance also goes high, because you have to maintain those Flow, OmniStudio scripts, OmniScripts, or LWC, and so on, right? So always stick to configuration if it is possible. But as we know, in our real business cases, that's not the case, right? I mean, business expects more, or they expect some custom screens from us, right? Because they need to really reduce the number of clicks, or they need to reduce their improve their business process, and so on. There can be multiple reasons. But then once those are there, then you move towards your right part of your configuration, which are starting with flow. So flow, screen flows, you already know, but the flow is basically how Salesforce has derived flow. Is it was an automation for the background, and then the screen flow was introduced, right? So it's very process oriented or process focused. Okay, it's not UI focused. Also, there are certain abilities in flows which are very, I would say, not easy to configure. They look easy, but when you start building screen flows, very soon you will create a very complex flow which will be hard to maintain, hard to debug. Okay, and that is where OmniStudio comes into picture, because OmniStudio is a very modular in approach. It is layered approach. What you do is that you build once and then you can use it at multiple places. So that modular approach gives it very flexibility. Second, there are a lot of components and flexibility in OmniStudio which are not provided in Flow, which gives it a better edge on the user experience and the flexibility as compared to Flow. And that is why you see it is a bit above the Flow. And of course, if all these three doesn't work and you really need a pixel perfect, amazing customer experience, very complex process to be described in your screens, the last part is custom way of doing it, which is LWC and other technologies which you can use to create custom screens on Salesforce. But of course, those are hard to maintain. And from scalability perspective, those are not a good option to go for it. So I would always say start with configuration. If not, choose between Flow or OmniStudio, and in the worst case, go for custom. That should be your design guideline or design decision tree when you select a specific solution. Okay, let's see what is OmniStudio layered approach, right? I mean, this diagram, you can also get it on Trailhead, but I really like this diagram. I wanted to create my own, but I thought, I mean, this is a very simple, but very nice diagram, which tells you how OmniStudio is layered and modularized. From the top, if you see, what they have is, in the OmniStudio, we have a digital experience layer, which primarily focuses on key tools provided by OmniStudio, which are flex cards and OmniScripts. Flex cards, in a very nutshell, are basically a short single page UI which provides you information at a glance. Okay, it is not there to solve end-to-end business process or multi-step UI screens. And when you need those kind of requirements, then you fall back to OmniScripts, where you OmniScripts you can basically do multi-step business process, multi-UI, complex processes on the screens, and so on. So OmniScript is much more powerful than FlexCard, but where you need very concise, at a glance information, FlexCard would make sense. So that's the digital experience layer. Once the digital experience layer is built, you can actually build the service management layer, and you can build all this separately. You don't have to like really build it all together. You can build it separately and then combine them when you're ready. So service management layer basically deals with all your data processes, processing your data, getting the data from multiple systems, integrating with external systems, and those kind of things. So in service management layer, there are two very special tools. Data mappers. Data mappers are nothing but to fetch and process the data from Salesforce, either from one or two objects, and you can also upload the data in Salesforce. Whereas integration procedures are much more advanced. Integration procedures are basically server-side processes which you need to invoke. It can be anything. It can be either you want to do a very complex process on the server side. For that, you can use an integration procedure. You want to basically integrate with an external system using REST API. Those are also possible by integration procedure. If you want to basically connect with Salesforce database or get Salesforce data from multiple objects, for that also you can create integration procedure. And there are multiple actions which we will cover in detail in subsequent slides. So these four components comprises of digital experience and service management layer. And then of course there is a developer experience which is specifically for developers for your deployment part. So once you use any tool for your development, you need to deploy your OmniStudio OmniScripts and those components, right? And it cannot be done in a normal deployment process, and for which Salesforce has provided a couple of tools. So IDX Workbench is basically a UI based tool from where you can actually do and perform your deployments and also monitor those deployments. Then IDX Build tool is more a command line interface. So if you are having your CI/CD pipeline or automating your deployments, IDX Build tool is the one which you will generally use from the command line interface to deploy your code into your higher hours. Okay. So in today's session, we will be primarily focusing on digital experience and service management layer. If required, I mean, we can go into the detail of developer experience in later sessions, but today we'll focus on this two and then action plan and R, because we really need to see what are the details there, and we'll see if time permits, we can look at developer experience too. Okay, so let's start with first the digital experience from the Flex card and OmniScript. What is a Flex card? Okay, so this is the official definition from Salesforce about the Flex card. Okay, so I would just like to highlight some key terms here. I mean, the definitions you can just read it in your spare time, but these are very customer centric UI component rich in information. Okay, so these key terms, what it tells is it is a very concise information which you can show on a single page from multiple data sources. Okay, so that is what is FlexCard about. Second key functionality you can also see here is actions, which means you can also add actions in FlexCards, which will result into various either an integration procedure or a data mapper or anything. So you can map this actions in the background to any of the other tools which we just saw. Okay, and the biggest thing is you can create this flex card using declarative design tool. You don't need to code a single line of code, and you can basically create this flex card declaratively. What Salesforce does is once you create this flex card, it converts this flex card into lightning pages, and those can be basically embedded into your lightning pages or into your experience cloud pages. So it converts into your into the LWC during the compile time, and it stores as an LWC. So those are in nutshell a flex card. So if you just see in a summary what we just saw, the flex card layout. On the left side, you can see various data of this glance. So you can see the customer name, you can see the address of the customer, from when the customer is basically part of this. So you need to really design this flex card before you start implementing it, because you really need to see what are the key informations you can store in this particular flex cards. Okay, because it can store a number of data from multiple sources. So you need to be cautious and give only the information which is very important and relevant for your agent. Then you can also add certain actions onto your flex card. As I mentioned, those actions can lead to either an OmniScript or to another LWC or any other pages as per your requirement. You can also see the data can be stored or showed in various styles. So you can have various styles on your particular data and show it in a different format. Another important point is flex card can be embedded inside another flex card. So if you see this blue one is basically another flex card embedded in the main flex card. So you can have a child flex card and which can be part of your parent flex card as a whole, and then that will combine be shown to the customer as a whole. The reason being for this is, as I mentioned, this flex card will be converted into an LWC, and there are certain limits in terms of character that your LWC can have that many characters. And if you really create a very complex flex card, it might happen that you might hit that limit and there might be issues. So to solve that problem, what my suggestion or recommendation is, generally you design your flex card in smaller components, and then you combine them to create a bigger flex card or a bigger console for your agents. Another important capability of FlexCard is basically it can get data from multiple sources. So the data can either come from your SOQL queries, it can be a REST API, it can be an integration procedure or a data mapper. So it can be any one of these mechanisms by which you can get the data. and map that data into your flex card to show it to your user. So that's in summary a flex card. So if you need to really give your agent at a glance specific view of multiple data, flex card will be a solution. But now if you need to solve a step-by-step business process solution, right, an interaction, for that flex card might not be a good solution. For that you need to jump into the second tool of the digital experience, which is OmniScript. Now, what is OmniScript? So this is again an official definition. It's an omni-channel customer engagement tool, okay, which provides you dynamic customer interaction without code. So you don't need to write a single line of code, but by just dragging and dropping certain components, which we will see in the org, you will be basically able to create this particular step-by-step business process for your users. Okay, I think the biggest thing which I like about OmniScripts, it has a very modular architecture. Your digital layer or your UI layer is separated from your service layer, which is your data mapper or integration procedure, which means you can test each of this component independently. Okay, and once you are confident of those components, then you can combine them to create the end-to-end process. That gives you flexibility of creating this components once, and then you can reuse this component at several places. For example, if you create a data mapper which gets an data from account object, okay, it gets an account object and it has certain fields. You can use this data mapper in OmniScript 1 and also in OmniScript 2, which means you only create this data mapper once, but you use it at multiple OmniScript places. And that's why I like this approach of modular architecture from OmniScript, which gives you a lot of power and a lot of strength. But just word of caution, uh, before you implement, you design it properly so that you reuse those components. The problem happens is when we don't design it properly and we just directly start implementing it, and we create a lot of technical depth into our org, and after 5 years it becomes a mess. So I would suggest before you start implementing your OmniScripts or data wrapper integration procedure, have your end-to-end business process clear in your mind. From there, try to see what are the components which you need to build modularly, and those components, how you can reuse it with other OmniScripts component. Okay. Then again, as I mentioned, it's a drag and drop, low to no code tool, which is one of the biggest strength. And then this as a flex card can also bring data from multiple data sources. Here also, again, there are various sources. You can bring it from external systems using REST APIs. You can use data mappers, you can use Sockle, you can use REST API, Apex code to get the data and so on. So there are multiple ways to get the data sources on the OmniScript here, which makes it really powerful. So yeah, from a UI perspective, this is what an OmniScript designer looks like, where you basically create your OmniScript. So on the left side, if you see, there's a navigation panel. This navigation panel will basically list down all the different components which are there. You can traverse them through. It can be either in a tree structure or in a UI format structure. At the center, you have your key canvas. This canvas is basically where you will have all your steps of your process or your UI, which you can drag, drop, and basically add components into this particular canvas. On the right side, you see the build or the properties section, where you basically drag all the components, or for a specific element, you can actually define the properties. And on the top, there is a header from where you can use preview to basically do a unit testing of your OmniScript. You can create a new version, you can deactivate your version, and so on. And again, OmniScript, once you create this OmniScript and you activate it, what Salesforce does is in the background, it converts it into an LWC and stores it as an LWC. And that Lightning component, you can add it to any of your Lightning pages, or you can create a button to open that particular Lightning component. So that is why you see once you activate it, you will see that particular flow from OmniScript, which is converting that into multiple LWC components. So that is the designer UI from where you create it. And this is basically the preview where you can test it. On this preview, you see I think the key difference is the context ID. So every OmniScripts need a specific context ID from the record where it is getting triggered. For example, if it is getting triggered from an account page, the account ID can be the context ID which passes to the OmniScript, and from there you can get the other data from using your data raptor. In this context ID from the your page, you can also pass additional parameters if required, but context ID is the key which is required to basically initiate your OmniScript. From this context ID, you can actually fetch all the other related data for that particular object or any related object as such. On the left side, you see the preview canvas where you see how your OmniScript is going to look like in the real screen. And on the top right, you have certain parameters which you can save. For example, the devices. You can basically test your OmniScript on multiple devices. As I mentioned, it can be used on desktop, mobile, or laptop. I mean, it is a responsive design from Salesforce. So once you build it, it will be automatically responsive as per your device, whichever you are using. And then there are themes. So you can either use Lightning or Newport. That we will see in the demo also, that once you change the theme, the look and feel of your OmniScript changes because it uses a different design theme from Salesforce, which is primarily coming from Velocity, which was the previous company, and Lightning LDS Lightning Design System is basically the Salesforce Lightning Design System. And then on the right side, you see there is data JSON, which really helps in debugging the OmniScript, because when you basically go step by step, you will see that the data JSON automatically gets adjusted, and you will be getting the updated data on the right side, which you can use to debug the whole flow of your OmniScript. And then there is an action debugger, which tells you each component, what was these, whether it was failed or success in the background. So when I trigger a data raptor, in the action debugger, you can go and see what was the status of that data raptor, whether it failed, it passed. If it passed, what was the parameter it was passed to it, and what was the response from the data raptor. So these tools are very important. Why I want to highlight is, I mean, testing your tool, testing your OmniScript or your UI is really important before you deploy it into your higher hours. Why? Because that will save a lot of your time for testing your end-to-end process. If you have tested each and every component thoroughly, your end-to-end testing or debugging will become very easier. And that's, I think, one of the key learnings for me in our project is, if those components which were tested properly individually, and then when they were integrated with other processes, I think those were more smoother than if you have not tested it properly. So I would highly recommend to use this testing tool very rigorously if you are doing an implementation on OmniStudio. Okay, now let's move to the next layer, or the second layer quickly, data mapper and integration procedure. And I mean, before I move ahead, just a word of cautious. I mean, there is a lot of things which I'm going to introduce new in the previous slide and this slide. But when we will see in the org, in the demo, we will dissect a specific OmniStudio. You can relate what I'm saying here, that okay, this component or this part looks like this. So then you will visually see how an OmniScript looks like, what are the steps, what are the different elements, how you configure them, how you can preview them. All those things we will go in detail and watch in detail. So now let's look at the second layer of OmniStudio, which is the service layer. And it's one of the key ones, because this is the layer which processes your data and feeds the data to your digital experience layer. And in this, there are two key tools, data mapper and integration procedure. So let's look at the data mapper. Data mapper is nothing but a tool which helps you to read data, write data, and transform the data from Salesforce. Okay, so this is very Salesforce specific tool, because most of the time we will be dealing with Salesforce data. And there are 4 types of data mappers which you can easily configure by drag and drop. So the first one is the data mapper turbo extract, which only gets the data from single Salesforce object. Second one is data mapper extract, which gets you data from one or more Salesforce objects. Now you might have a question that, okay, if data mapper extract can fetch the data from one or more Salesforce object, why do I need turbo extract? I think the simple answer to that is, the turbo extract is much more performant as compared to extract, and second, it is easy to configure. So if you really in your process need only single Salesforce object data, my recommendation would be to go with the data mapper turbo extract, which will be more performant to return you the data as compared to data mapper extract, which is basically built to get data from multiple objects. You can get data from multiple objects, then transform it into one JSON and return it to your OmniScript. So that is the purpose of the data mapper extract. Then comes the data mapper load, which is nothing but the reverse part, which is updating or creating the data into the Salesforce objects. We will see an example of data mapper extract and data mapper load in the OmniScript, which I will talk about. And we will see how to configure them, what are the elements into those particular data mappers, and how to configure those. And the last one is data mapper transform, which basically manipulates any data that comes from inside or outside Salesforce. Why it is helpful is, just to give you an example, for example, you make a REST call out to an external system, get the data, okay. You have got it in a specific format, but your OmniScript needs it in another format. So what happens is you basically need to transform that particular data which is coming from an outside world into your OmniScript format using this data mapper transform, using this particular component to basically manipulate this data either coming inside or outside of the Salesforce. So these four tools are really key from OmniStudio data mapper perspective, which you can play around with the data and process the data in Salesforce. How it looks like from a UI perspective is, this is how the data mapper designer tool looks like. So you have to basically select an object which has to be loaded, okay, and then there are certain tabs on which you need to provide the fields for which you need to map the input field with the Salesforce fields to create those fields and objects in Salesforce. And then again, as I mentioned, each of these tools have capability of preview, where you can basically test your data mapper, whether it is uploading or getting the right data for your OmniScript or not. So this preview is really important to test your individual components here. All these components you see, there is not a single line of code written. These are all drag and drop and configurable way of writing these data raptors. And in the background, Salesforce automatically converts them into the Apex or Sockle and get the data for you from the backend database. So that's the first data mapper load, and we will also see an example of data extract in the demo. Now let's move to the integration procedure. So integration procedure is basically it's again a declarative but server-side process which can execute multiple actions for you in a single server call. So what it can do is either it can get you the data from Salesforce using the data mapper actions. So you can call an integration procedure, and that can internally call a data mapper post action, which will load the data into Salesforce. It can also call a data mapper extract action, which can get the data from Salesforce and send you. It can also have an HTTP action, which is nothing but an REST API call out for your external systems, and that is where you can get data from external systems. So that is why integration procedure is much more powerful than data raptors, because in a real scenario or a real business case, most of the time you are going to get data from multiple systems, not only Salesforce, and hence integration procedure is one of the key elements of OmniStudio. You can also do is you can invoke Apex classes via remote actions in integration procedure. Response action is something which you return to the caller of this particular integration procedure the data which you have retrieved and transformed. And then there are also certain capabilities, like you can easily integrate with DocuSign templates to create the DocuSign envelopes and send it via the DocuSign tool for getting the online signature or digital signature from your customers. So that's also one of the key capabilities of integration procedure. Or via email action, you can send the email. So these are on a high level key components or the capabilities of integration procedure. There are much more, but I have just shown you on a high level top 6 or 7. It can also send and receive the data, as I already mentioned. And this can be used both for OmniScript as well as FlexCard to get and put the data. This, as I mentioned, it is portable, which means you can just create it once and use it everywhere. So now how it looks like from a designer perspective. So I mean, if you see, I mean, from design perspective, most of the OmniStudio tools, right, they have designed it very similarly, right? So on the left side, you have the components which you can drag drop. So you have cache blocks, you have data mapper extract action, post action, transform actions. These you can drag drop into your canvas, which tells you the steps of your integration procedure. So this can basically do perform steps in one go. Why we need to do this perform multiple steps in one go is because this will just make one server round trip, and which will save you multiple round trips from server. So you call the server, you say that, okay, I need to do action 1, 2, 3, and all these 3 actions will be done in one go. That means you are not going to go 3 times to the server, come back again and go again, right? So that is going to save a lot of time, and it will make your whole system much more performant as compared to normal system. And on the right side, again, you see you can configure properties of for each of these components. And as I mentioned here, also you can actually preview and test your integration procedure individually and see if your integration procedure is working fine or not. Okay. So that's basically in a nutshell your integration procedure. Okay, now we have seen 3 or 4 components and tools from OmniStudio perspective, right? Now let's see how all this stitch together, right? So let's join the dots between all these 3. So here I have 2 examples end to end. The first one is where I'm getting some data from Salesforce and I need to show it on the OmniScript. And the second one is where OmniScript is updating certain data and sending it to Salesforce for saving it. So how an end-to-end it works is you have an OmniScript which is your digital experience layer. Sorry. So here all the UI parts come into picture, which wants to show certain data based on the account ID, for example. What it does is it sends this context ID or account ID to your integration procedure. Integration procedure internally calls the data mapper extract, passes the account ID, and data mapper extracts internally, fires Socker or Apex or whatever internally it can do. It gets the data from Salesforce based on the account ID, gets the required data, and data mapper extract will return the JSON back to integration procedure, and integration procedure will return it back to OmniScript. One more thing, important point here to notice, this data mapper extract and IP can return only the data which is required for the OmniScript. So for example, if you're fetching, for example, I don't know, 10 rows or 10 columns from the Salesforce, but your OmniScript only needs 3, you can trim down that particular JSON in integration procedure and only return 3 columns to OmniScripts to make it more performant. So you don't need to return the whole data of account to OmniScripts to basically use it, but you only need to data which you want from business perspective. So that's your first process end to end from OmniScript to Salesforce. The second one is where OmniScript is going to update the data in Salesforce. For that, OmniScript uses again JSON. So JSON is the way data is being communicated across all the components in OmniStudio, and it is well versed that if you are aware of JSON structure, I mean, it really helps in OmniStudio. Integration procedure then again calls another data mapper load, which we just saw, and this data mapper load stores the data in Salesforce. It can also do an upsert, or it can do an insert based on the configuration you have done in your data mapper load. Once it is done, it will return you the ID, and that ID is written, and that ID you can return it to OmniScript to show that, okay, the end-to-end process has been worked. So that's kind of an end-to-end process, a very simplistic view, but it at least tells you that how all these components are stitching together and interacting with each other to give you an end-to-end process view for your OmniScript. Okay, now let's move into a specific use case, right? So let's go through this use case, and then I'll go into the org, and we will together see how this OmniScript is built, what are the different components of this OmniScripts, and how we can test those individually. So the use case is very simple. For an energy-based company, what we need to do is user should be able to see their the customer's existing meter reading for the day and night meter. So they have two types of meter, and they need to see the existing meter reading for them for their customer. Once they see it, user should have capability to provide a new meter reading in the same screen. Okay, and once they provide the new meter reading for day and night, the flow should automatically show a projected price based on the new meter readings provided. And at the end, when the user submits, the new meter reading should get stored into the account details, account object, and the projected price should also get updated. So that's kind of a use case. It looks very complex, but when I will show you the OmniScript, it will look very simple. So let's move to the org then. Okay. Let me refresh it. Yeah. So if you see, this is my standard account page, right? And what I have done is, just to save the time, I have created an OmniScript which is called meter reading, and I have added it onto the lightning page on the right side. As I mentioned, your OmniScripts gets converted into an LWC component, and that LWC you can drag drop into any of your lightning pages, or you can have a button on top which can also initiate your OmniScript component, for which you have to write a very simple Visualforce code, and there are some codes provided. I will show you in a while. From there, you can just copy paste the code and create those Visualforce component to pop up that particular Visualforce. Now, if you see this particular OmniScript, right, and if you remember the requirement was very simple, that when the user opens this, he should be able to see the existing meter readings and should have ability to give the new meter readings. So what I have done is, I have created the existing meter reading which is visible on the screen, but the new meter reading block is collapsed, just to save some space here. And if I expand it, the user can basically give the new meter reading here. So if I give, for example, new meter reading here, and there is also a capability of save for later. So I will cover that in a while, but let's first go to next. Okay. So when I press next, you see that my old data or whatever I provided in my first screen has been preserved, and I get another projected price which is based on the new meter reading. So what it does is, it subtracts your new with old, and with certain formula it is basically creating this particular projected price. The important point to note here is, this projected price is calculated on the client side, which is using a certain function element which I will show you in the OmniScript, and that functional element has certain formula. So it just uses your client side data, it calculates it, and on runtime it is giving you this value, which means you're not going back to server, and this OmniScript which will be much more performant. Okay. Now let's do a submit. Okay. So what this OmniScript will do is, now it is calling an IP in the background. Once it calls the IP, it will call a data raptor, and the data mapper will update this particular Salesforce object here. So now let's refresh and see if the values have been updated or not. And for the sake of simplicity of the demo, I have added this field into on the account object itself. But as you would have imagined, this doesn't make sense to override on the account object. Ideally, you should have a separate object and then have the track of your meter readings, right? Ideally, that should be the way you design the data model. But for the sake of simplicity, I just added this field on the account. So you have the meter number. You have your night meter reading. As you say, I have already updated. It has already updated to 50. The day meter reading has also been updated to 150. And the price projection is also changed to 20.25. Okay. Now, if you see on the right side, the existing meter reading is now updated to 150 from 110. Now let's look at another functionality of this OmniScript of save for later. And now if I just, for example, I give it 200 as my new meter reading and I say next. But now at this point of time, I say, okay, I am not sure if it is really 200 and I want to save for later, and I can come back and save it. So OmniScript by default gives this capability of save for later, where you can basically save this and later you can come back to this OmniScript and all your data will be preserved and you will continue from that particular point. So now let's see how it looks, and I will also show you how the save for later is basically working in the background. So, okay, so now you see OmniScripts gives you a specific link, which is your very customized contextualized OmniScript link. Now, if I just copy this link, and for example, if I go to another tab and open this link, you will see the same OmniScript opening with the data which I have provided there, and from there I can just continue and complete that particular transaction to basically complete the script. So if you see, I had provided 200, which is already preserved, and this, I mean, this is very simple scenario, so you don't see the value of this. But if you have a very multi-step process, complex process where you are putting a lot of data, this makes it very powerful because you can save this for later for your agents and they can come back and basically perform this particular operation again. So now from here, if I just submit, this should get saved. And if I go back to the screen and refresh, the OmniScript should automatically update the meter readings and the projected price on my account object. Yeah. So if you see now, the readings have been updated, the price projection has also been updated, right? And here again, my OmniScript is also showing me the right values. So that's a very, I would say from an implementation perspective, it's a very simple OmniScript. But from a business value perspective, I think it gives a lot of, I would say, a lot of business value to the customers. So now let's look at the OmniScript. So I'm now opening the OmniScript here. So yeah, just before going into the OmniScript, so this is your whole OmniStudio designer. So you can just find it from your tiles. You can just search on your app launcher OmniStudio, and if you have access or got permission of your OmniStudios, you will see this designer in which you have 4 components onto your main page on your app. So you have OmniScripts, you have FlexCast, Data Mapper, and Integration Procedure, as we saw on the slides. And let's dissect one by one. So the OmniScript which I just showed you, right? So let's look at this briefly, how it looks like, right? So this is how it looks like onto your designer page. On the left side, as I mentioned, you have the canvas where you can see the different steps of my OmniScript. You can also collapse it and use in a tree structure way. And from here, you can see, okay, in this particular step, I have these elements. In the second steps, I have these elements, and so on. Okay, so that's it. That's, I think it depends on your preference. I personally like this view. On the center, you see the actual canvas where you drag and drop all the elements, and on these elements, you can basically set the properties on the right side. And if you see, logically for this particular OmniScript to work, what we should have done is, first, we need to get the account data, which is your meter reading, a meter number, account name, and so on, right? And that is why you see the first element which I use is data mapper extract action, which you can directly call from your OmniScript and get the data. The second step is basically to show the meter reading to the user at a first glance, first time, that what is the existing meter reading, and ability to give him the new meter reading. Once that is done, the next step or the next component is set account values, which will basically set the values into the meter readings. And then you show a meter summary with your projected price. And once that is done, at the end of submit, you basically call an integration procedure to update an account. So these 5 steps basically were resulting into the screen which I just showed you, which looked much more fancier than this. But if I go into the detail of each component, you will see the complexity there. On the right side of the OmniScript, you can see the build properties and setup, but I'll come to that in a while. So first, let's look at the first data mapper extract action, right? So we have multiple actions here in the build component, which you can drag into your OmniScript. So you can have data mapper extract action. You can have turbo action for one object. You can have post action to create records and objects, and transform actions. And then there are multiple actions which you can use below, like PDF action, remote action to call an apex, set values, and so on. And you can also call an integration procedure action from here. So for this one, I actually use the data mapper extract action to show you how the data mapper is being created. So if I just go to the properties of this, I need to just select a data mapper interface, which is the data raptor or data mapper I have created in the background. And what I have done is I have passed the context ID. So if you remember, the context ID is nothing but the record ID from which this OmniScript is going to get triggered. In my case, it was account. So hence the account ID was my context ID in this particular case, which is going to get passed to this particular data mapper. And if I just go to this data mapper now, let's look at the data mapper. And in the data mapper, we have multiple. In this designer, there are 5 options which you can do. The first step as a data mapper is, of course, you need to give a name. My recommendation or principle is always to have certain naming convention for your project. For example, data raptor should always start with DR. Integration procedure should always start with IP, and so on, so that you easily identify them and have certain naming convention for your project. Otherwise, very soon you will get lost into it, and it will be very hard to debug your OmniStudio. So for this one, I have given dr get account, and what I'm going to pass is, first is in the extract, I need to select the object which I need to fetch. So here I need to fetch the account object, and for that account object, I need to give a specific extract output path. So this extract output path is what will show in this JSON like this. So you will have account and the related fields, and you need to give a specific filter that for this particular ID should be equal to the account ID which I have passed to this data mapper, which is the context ID. So once this ID matches, it will fetch a specific account record, and that those fields it will return it based on the mapping I have done on the output section. So on the output table, here I can map all the fields from your extract JSON path. So this first column shows you the fields coming from the account object, which are mapped to a specific fields on my OmniScript. So this you can consider, if you have done Java coding or any other coding, consider this as variables. So these are the variables I have defined in my OmniScript, which I will use in my OmniScript to map it. So this data coming from account will get mapped to these particular variables in my OmniScript, which I can use later on. And if you see on the right side, it shows you a specific sample of this particular JSON, how it is going to look like. So for example, name, meter number, day meter reading, and night meter reading, these are coming from my output JSON path, and these are the values which are going to come from the account. So that's the output. Formulas is, if you want to put some formulas in between when you are transforming this data, you can put some formulas. Options I will cover, but in a brief summary, data raptors, what you can do is you can use certain cache. Okay, what happens is, if your OmniStudio has come with a velocity package, with an industry cloud package, okay, it will always use the platform cache. But if you are buying OmniStudio standalone, it will use something called scale cache. But at this point of time, I am doing a demo on an industry cloud. Hence, I'm using a platform cache. So you can cache this data onto your platform cache by session or org, and you can give for how many times that cache will be valid. For now, I have not cached it because it's a very simple query. But in your actual projects, if you are firing a very complex query or complex objects, I would suggest utilize the cache, but be careful, because if your cache is not refreshed and you really need data before the cache is expired, you will only get the cache data and not the real data from your database. So you need to really see what are your project requirements and if that fits into this. Field level security. So this is a checkbox. If you check, it will check the field level security for the user who is using this OmniScript and data raptor, data mapper. And if the field level security is not there, it will not return you those fields. So from security perspective, it's really important. At this point of time, I have not enabled it, and any user who is using this data mapper has access to this data mapper can fetch the fields from this data mapper. The last section is the preview, which, as I mentioned, is the testing tool for this particular data mapper. So irrespective of any OmniScript, I can just come to this OmniStudio. I can create this data mapper and use it n number of places. So for example, I pass it a context ID of this. So this is my ID of the account which I was showing you. And if I press execute, probably I need to refresh this. Okay, let's refresh it. I think it's open for a long time. So what happens is, once you execute it, on the right side, you should get an output from your object and the fields which you have mapped onto your output, and those fields will be coming back to your yeah. So now if you see, I can test this basically context ID. I can give any record ID which I want. And on the right side, I see, okay, what kind of data am I going to get? So the name of the account, my night meter reading, day meter reading, and my meter number. So that is what I need to display on my first screen. On the right side, you can also see what queries it has fired, how much time it has taken, and what was the result of those queries. So, I mean, it is very nice for your debugging purpose. And one more thing I want to highlight here is the performance metrics on the top. If you see, you can actually divide your time on how much total time it has taken, and what is the time taken by a browser, time taken by your server, and time taken by your Apex CPU. So in the background, it has called certain Apex classes or SOCL, and the time taken for them is 99 milliseconds, whereas for browser it was 506 milliseconds. Server, it was 182 milliseconds. So those kind of parameters will help you in your real project to identify if there are any performance bottlenecks and if you want to improve any specific things. For example, you can use caching, you can use other mechanisms to basically improve this particular metrics from your response time. So that's, I think, on a nutshell, your data mapper to get the data from Salesforce. Here I have used the data mapper extract action to get the data. So now this data mapper has got the data from Salesforce by passing the context ID, which was the account ID. Now I have my data which I need to show it on the first step. So the next step is what I have meter reading, which I need to display the data into this particular component. So the data which was coming from the database is going to be displayed on the name, meter number, day meter reading, and night meter reading. So these are individual elements as text properties which I can display. And there are certain characteristics, like I can make it required, I can make it read only, because I don't want user to update this. So I will just make it read only and they cannot update it on the OmniScript. There are also certain capabilities. You can mask this data. There are lengths. You can auto-complete and n number of settings. I mean, I don't want to go into the details. You can go into those and you will have a lot of documentation for them. Each of those, if you see, you also have a lot of help in particular components to see what is the help you need there. For this particular help icon, right, you have help option where you can activate this help text and provide the help text here. For multi-language, you can also use custom labels here, and then they will be translated automatically. So from that point of view, it's also a very cool feature that you can build this particular screen like in no time. Maybe like in half a day or one day, you can just create the screen if all your requirements are clear and you know what to do, right? So it's very fast way of building this type of screens. Now comes the meter number, which is similar. And then another functionality which I have used is the block. So if you see, when I opened my OmniScript, my new meter reading block was actually collapsed by default, whereas existing meter reading was not collapsed. That I did it purposely to just show you the functionality of collapse here. So for this particular blocks, if you collapse, it will be shown as collapsed, and the user will have to click and open it. It all depends on your real estate space of your screen, how much you want to utilize, where you want to collapse, where you want to expand, what you want to really show, and what you don't want to show. Those kind of functionalities you need to really work with your business or UX designer and make sure that you are creating a right UI for your experience for your customer. In this case, I wanted to have collapsed, and user has to click and provide the new meter readings. And if you see, the new meter readings are now required. So they are not read only, but I've changed it to required, and they have to provide a value to basically go to the next step. If they don't provide, they will get an error message. And all other parameters are, the same. You can just go through it when you have time. So this is my step one, where I show the specific meter reading. And then I have to add a specific step, which we call it as set values. And the reason being is because I want to pass this values coming from step one, which is meter reading, to the step two, which is my meter summary. And this is a very simple step where you just map. So it's like an in your programming language, which you call it the assignment. So you assign the variables from one variable to another, and then you continue those using into your other steps. So this just assigns, for example, the name variable into an S name, and this S name is the variable which I'm going to use in my summary step as the next step. So after the set value, I have a similar step as the first one, meter reading, and you don't have to create it from scratch. You see here a clone button. If you just clone this, you will just have the same step again, and you can just tweak it. So what I did is I clone it, and I just added an additional field called projected price. Rest all fields were same. I just give them a right name, and that name was basically coming from the set values. And this will again show the same values as coming from the previous screen, what user has provided. But the big difference here is the projected price, and I would like to show you the projected price. Why? Because this is a specific type of element which we call it as formula properties, and this will calculate this formula on the client side on the runtime, which will save a lot of your time going back to the server and calculating it on the runtime. So here, if you see, it takes all the values from the screen, and just I have put a certain formula, and based on that formula, it will calculate the price and show it on the screen. It is of type currency, and that's why you see all the euros and everything automatically coming into this particular picture. So I have shown you certain elements like step, text, input, number, and so on, right? From where does it come? So it comes from the build. So if you see here, we have three sections: build, properties, and setup. So build is where you basically drag all the component onto your canvas. So if you need a specific action, for example, I need a DR get account, I will go to action and I will drag from here to canvas. If I need a specific functions element like formula, I will just drag from here and I will add it to my specific step. You can basically group all these particular steps. So this one step is one group, and within that, you see I had used something called block. Block is also kind of a specific action or a group which I have used from here. Okay, and you can give specific properties to your group and so on. So there are multiple abilities or elements which you can use here. And primarily is input, where you can input a lot of different types of data into your form, starting text, number, email, lookup, file, password, and so on, right? So there are many number of elements which you can leverage here, and you can just drag drop into your canvas, give them some properties, and you are good to go there. So that is input, and at the end is OmniScript. So as I mentioned, you can actually embed an OmniScript into an OmniScript. So if you have created certain OmniScript, you can just drag that into the OmniScript, and yeah, you are done. So your OmniScript automatically gets embedded into the another one. And then the last component of the OmniScript is the integration procedure. So this integration procedure is basically going to update my account details back to the account object so that I have my data updated. For this, I just need to basically drag this integration procedure action from my build into my canvas, and then give some properties and create a specific integration procedure here. So this integration procedure which I have created is this one. So now what this integration procedure is going to do is it's also a very simple integration procedure. Here again, from canvas point of view, on the left side you have certain components which you can drag and create your structure. On the right side you have specific properties, and from the preview you can test this integration procedure for checking if everything is working fine. The second component of this integration procedure is the update account, which is the key one. So this is again a data mapper post action which I dragged from here, and I just gave some properties and the input parameters to this particular data raptor. So you need to see that remember that slide where we had end-to-end flow, right? So OmniScript was calling an integration procedure. Integration procedure was calling a data raptor. Data raptor is calling Salesforce and then returning the data in the same way. Here, the same sequence is happening. The OmniScript submit meter reading is calling an IP integration procedure, and IP here is internally calling a data raptor, and this data raptor dr update account is of type load, which means it is going to create or update the data in Salesforce. Now, how does this data mapper knows that it has to create or update the records, right? So there is something called upsert key, which I will show you in a while. And based on that upsert key, it knows that, okay, it has to upsert or insert the data. So again, the structure, if you see, is very similar to the extract one. Here you need to select the object first. Once you select the object, in the field, you need to give what is the input variable which is going to come, and the domain object field is the field which is your account fields. So it is the reverse from the extract. In extract, you see on the left side, you had the field from account which was getting populated to the variable. Here it is other way around. The variables are going to be stored into your domain object fields. So these ID, day meter reading, night meter reading, price projections are the field from my account object, and these are variables coming from my IP. Now if you see on the ID field, I have checked actually two boxes. Upsert key and is required for upsert. What does that mean? If I check this, every time this data mapper is going to try to create a record, it will first check whether there is a record existing with this particular field, which is ID in this case. If it finds a record, it will actually update the record and not insert it. If it doesn't find any record, then it will insert the record into that particular field. So this is something which is useful if you don't know that if you're creating an object or you're updating an object based on a specific key, you can basically do this upsert. Of course, this might impact some of your performance because it has to do certain processing. But if you're not sure, this would be a good way to do an upsert into your account. And the other fields, you can just map it like this. Options is again, I mean, if you want to roll back on error, ignore errors, assignment rules, and so on. And on the preview, I'll not run this, but it's similar. On the left side, you give your inputs. Once you execute, you will see what is the object being created. And on the right side, you see the debug logs. And you also see the performance matrix, how much time this query or this data raptor has taken to execute this particular insert or upsert. Now the data raptor is clear from load interface. It's a load one, data mapper load. The IP is going to call this particular data mapper load, and it is going to pass these additional inputs into the data mapper. This variables are being same as the data mapper, and on the right side, these are coming from my OmniScript. So for example, if you see meter summary block 2 S new day meter reading, how we should read this is, and this is a bit tricky because you need to really go from a structure perspective that on which step and under which block that variable is there. If you directly give the variable name, it will not try to identify it because it confuses from this. So here it is under a meter summary. So this name you see meter summary. Under that I have a block 2, which is this new meter reading, and under the block 2 I need this variable to be stored back in Salesforce. So that structure you need to really give into your IP to make sure that this identifies the right variable which has to be stored in your IP. Once you give all these 4 variables, and then it just calls the data raptor and returns back the response back to submit meter reading. And at the end, I mean, of course, this IP will have some properties. You can show the toast on completion, so the success message which you are seeing on the top, and there are many other parameters. You can have error messaging frameworks, and conditional view. Yeah, conditional view is important because every element has a certain conditional view, and you need to give certain conditions here based on which you can basically enable or disable a specific component on a screen. So you need to really have a complex process where you don't want to show a specific step for certain conditions. Then you can just use this condition view and hide a particular element or a particular step into your process. Now let's quickly look at the this on the top header part, right? On the header part, there are multiple buttons. The first one is the preview, which gives you the design view of, the test view or the debug view of your OmniScript. This is how my OmniScript is going to look like. Right now, you see there is no data into this, right? Why? Because I have not provided any context ID. But if I just provide a context ID and refresh it, you will see that this data raptor in the background is going to get the data and populate my OmniScript. So it is populating. And on the best part is on the right side, you see the full JSON of this particular OmniScript and what are the values. So as I had provided the context ID, it starts populating my meter reading object with name, existing meter reading, and a meter number, and so on. There are other things on the top. What you can also do is you can preview this based on the device. So how this will look like on a tablet, it will automatically be responsive on mobile and so on. So if I just go to the desktop, from theme perspective, there are 2 themes available. As I mentioned, you can use the Lightning and the new port. Once you go to the new port, you'll see the look and feel will change. You can see the look and feel of this changes because this theme is coming from Velocity, and there are certain guidelines on when to use Newport, when to use LDS. I have mostly used Lightning because most of my projects I've used Lightning, and that's the way I have done it. But yeah, there are certain guidelines when you can use Newport or Lightning theme as per your need. So now if I just quickly show you how this data JSON gets updated, right? If I just provide here my new readings, right? If you see on the right side, the data is getting updated automatically. So you always have a track of all your data which is being updated or used in your OmniScript. And this is very easy or very helpful for you debugging your specific OmniScript and see where the issues is, if there is a null value in a specific parameter, and so on. So here, if you see, the projected price is automatically calculated to 30, which is coming from this particular element. And then once you submit it, it will go. Quickly showing the action debugger. On the action debugger, you will have the response and the request data for each of your data mapper get account, and it was fired multiple times because I had maybe tested it for multiple times. But if you clear log, you will see what time it has been fired and what data it has been fetching from particular data raptor or data mapper, and what data is in the request and the response. So it takes the context ID and returns you this particular data. So I mean, these tools are very helpful in debugging your UI. And then once you are comfortable, then you can deploy it and basically move ahead onto this particular thing. And then if I just go back to the design view, yeah, and if I just show you quickly. I mean, see, once you deactivate this particular OmniScript, ideally you always will create a new version, but for this demo purpose, I'm just deactivating it. And just wanted to show you that when you're activating, you can see that it is compiling your OmniScript. What does that mean? It is basically compiling into an LWC and then deploying that LWC and giving you a lightning component which you can drag drop, which I just showed you on the account screen. And that's how basically that uh, the mechanism of OmniScript basically in the background works. So once this is done, this will be ready for us to be used into specific use cases. Yeah, and one more last thing which I wanted to show on the OmniScript was the save for later. So for the save for later, there is a specific object called OmniScript saved session. So if you, I mean, as an homework or as an exercise, if you just go to that OmniScript saved session object, you will basically see a URL field which stores the URL for save for later, and you can refer that field anytime you want. If you want to debug that, okay, I have saved for later, but my URL is not working, and what are the other details, you can go to that object and then just have a look on different fields on that particular object. So if you are interested, go to that object and just have a look of different fields. There are a lot of fields into that object, which gives you additional information of your OmniScripts. So that's OmniScripts. Let's come back to these slides now. Okay. So now, yeah, some of the practical notes from my personal experience of project. As I already mentioned, I mean, always design your OmniScript data mapper and integration procedure in a modular way so that you can do your maximum reuse. The biggest problem I have seen is people just implement it for a specific case and they never reuse those components in any other places. If you are, I mean, an architect or a designer for your OmniStudio project or an industry cloud project, I just request you to design all these components, have a catalog of these components, and when you're designing a new OmniStudio, always see if there is an integration procedure or a data mapper which you can reuse into your component or into your new OmniScript or OmniStudio which you are going to design. That way, you are going to reduce your cost of implementation, and also your from maintenance perspective, it will be easier for you to maintain. So that's my first feedback. Second, as I mentioned, I think the naming standard is very, very critical for an OmniStudio because there are so many components available in this particular OmniStudio that very soon you will get lost if you don't follow a naming convention, and it will be very hard to debug or maintain your IP or data raptor and so on. Generally, for data mapper, you start with DR. IP, you always start with IP. You use your camel case. I mean, all the standard features which you do, right? But mostly, I mean, if you don't put a check on this for your project team, I'm sure very soon you will lose control of your OmniStudio and your details. So I would really recommend to have a naming standard for your project and make sure that everyone follows it. Yeah, only so when you create OmniScripts, you will have multiple versions. So when you deactivate one version, there is a new version activated, right? And there can be only one active version at one point of time in your org for a specific OmniScript. What does that mean? The most recurring issue I have seen, at least on a higher org, is that your latest OmniScript version is not at active. Okay, what happens sometimes when you're deploying, you deploy an older version, but you have a later version where your actually updated code is there, and then the bugs are retested and they are reopened because your latest OmniScript version is not open. So if you are using OmniScript, the first thing to check is if your OmniScript latest version is activated and has an active checkbox in front of it. If not, activate that first and then check if your bugs are getting resolved. Most of the time, that is the issue because you have tested locally onto your local org using the preview buttons, right? And if it is working fine there, most of the time it should work on higher org, but it doesn't work because your older version gets activated. Another important tip is when designing, always try to mix your solutions, because I mean this was a very simple solution, so we could simple requirement of use case, we could solve it by just OmniScript. But in a real world, we know how complex business processes can be, how demanding business requirements can be. So there, what you could do is you could basically mix your solutions by embedding certain component into other. For example, you can embed an LWC component into an OmniScript. So just to give you an example, in one of our projects, we had requirement to have a table, and on that table we had to show records, and the user can select one or multiple records and then take certain actions. In OmniScript, this tabular requirement cannot be met by configurable way, and hence we had to build a certain LWC. So what we said, okay, the whole other component of that screen will be OmniScript, but only this table we created as an reusable LWC, and we embedded that LWC in all our OmniScripts. That way we actually promoted the reusability of that LWC, and also we leverage the OmniScript for all other components. So that way, if you mix your solutions, I mean, you can use power of both LWC as well as OmniScript, and that gives you a lot of business value and business significance from your solution point of view. And as I mentioned, I mean, repeatedly build and test each component separately, because if you don't do that, and when you try to test the whole OmniScript end to end, very soon you will be lost, because you will not know why this data is not coming, why this integration procedure is not saving my data, why data, I mean, it will be very hard to debug. Hence, test each component, I mean, do your unit testing properly and then stitch it around, and then your end-to-end flow will most probably work with very fewer bugs, and that will save a lot of your debugging time from an end-to-end perspective. So these were, I think, top 5 or 6 practical takeaways from my experience. I mean, from best practices perspective, if you go to Trailhead or Help, Salesforce Help, you will find n number of articles from best practices. I would recommend to go to the Trailhead or Help articles and go through those best practices. I have not covered those because it will become too theoretical, and hence I just covered the practical ones, which I felt are really important from implementation point of view. Okay. So, I mean, I hope that gives a good overview of OmniStudio. Now let's move to two nice tools, at least from my point of view, they are my favorites. From an industry cloud perspective, Action Plans and Arc. And I somehow feel that I think people don't use it quite often. But these are very easy to implement, very simple, but they would give a lot of brownie points to you if you implement it and showcase to your business from an implementer perspective. So let's see what is an action plan. Action plan and templates. I mean, these are just theoretical definitions, but to explain you, I mean, you have an end-to-end business process, a complex business process, and within business process, most of the time you have certain micro business processes. Give you an example, we have like a case management process end-to-end, but at the end of that case, we have to do a translation. But for translation, there are 3 people involved, and that is what I called it as a micro business process within your end-to-end business process. So to solve that particular micro business process, action plan and templates are best suitable tools which you can leverage to very quickly configure this in a very repeatable and reusable manner, and create those repeatable tasks for certain users, and track that particular micro business process and get it complete. Similarly, another example is publication. In public sector, I think the publication of your document, publication of your results, that is a very important process, and that's one of the microprocesses which you can use. We can also use it for visit process, and there can be many n number of scenarios. You have to really identify in your business process whether these can be achieved by action plan and templates or not. So again, coming back to action plan, templates, and action plan. So as the name suggests, action plan templates are the repeatable tasks which you can create, configure the dependencies across them, whereas action plan is a runtime instance of your action plan template. Consider this like in Java, action plan template is a class, whereas action plan is the object which you create from that class, right? So it's in that way. So you need to create an action plan template first. You create your template. You say, okay, I want to create task 1, task 2, task 3, and this is my dependency. These are the reminders I want to say send. And based on this template, when you will create an action plan, that action plan will basically follow the template and automatically create all those tasks, and it will follow the sequence and dependencies and reminders and everything which you have configured into a template. And that saves a lot of your time to create those tasks manually. And that's, I think, very nice value or feature of action plan and template. So what are the key capabilities of action plans? You can basically add tasks as part of your action plan template, which can be completed in a single process. You can add task dependencies. You can also assign this task to specific queues or a role or action plan creator or a specific user. Okay, I will come to this task assignment because there are some complexity in this task assignment, but from configuration point of view, if you want to assign it to a queue, I mean, it is very easy. But I'll give you an example from our project where we had very complex requirements and we had to adopt certain requirements, certain solution from action plans. Then you can also schedule a recurring action plans. You can send reminders in the action plans and for your specific users and so on. So these are some of the high level key capabilities of action plan. Now, just to understand how this is modeled from a data model perspective, because this is very important to understand, because if you are creating or architecting a solution for action plan, uh, understanding this data model is crucial according to me, because when I started action plan, I was not sure of this data model, and we made some we had to understand this basically to create the right solution. So here you see action plan template has multiple action plan versions. So each the activated version or the version which you want to use will have the linked action plan, and this action plan will have action plan item. This action plan item can be linked either to a task or to document checklist item. So these two standard objects are coming from the industry cloud, which you can link to an action plan item depending on the type of action plan template you have configured. Okay. Why I am saying this is important is because when you create an action plan, your task is not directly created. Action plan item is first created, and when the task of your first action plan item is completed, then the task for the second is created. So tasks are only created dynamically when that action plan item is triggered or started. So they are not created like all at once at the start of the action plan. They are only created when they are actually being triggered or initiated. So now how this data model is put into the instances, you have a parent object for each action plan template, for example, a case, and this action plan template has task 1, task 2, and task n. When it is converted to action plan, you can have multiple action plans for the same template, because this is the instance of action plan template and they can be linked to the same parent object as the action plan template. And then each task can have can be assigned to user A or user B, and they will have their own task list to complete from the particular action plan based on the dependency and the configuration you have done onto your action plan. So let's quickly look at the action plan and then we can move to the arc part. Okay. So from an action plan template perspective, if you just see the action plan template, there is an object called action plan template on which you can configure the action plan. I have already configured one where I have 3 tasks. So my action plan template is called translation, and this translation is basically having 3 tasks. You can add the document text for translations, which is assigned to a translation office queue. Then this document is reviewed for translation, which is reviewed by the action plan creator who has created this action plan. And then someone updates this document or text for translations after the review or the comment from the reviewer. And this is again done by the translation office queue. So this queue will pick up this task, complete it, and then the second task will be created. So it is, although it is set task, but actually in the background, it creates action plan item along with the action plan. It doesn't create the task unless the start date of the task has reached. So once the start date of this review doc is reached or the previous task is completed, then the task will be created for this. Till then, the task is not there. Why I'm saying this is because if you want to create any automations in the background based on the task, you will not be able to create it. You have to base it on the either on the action plan item or when the task is being created. So that is probably a bit trick or catch. You should be careful when you are document or when you are implementing action plan templates and so on. So now if I just go to the to a specific case here, you will see that action plans can be created from here. So you have a special component called action plans on which you can just do new plan and action plan will be created. So for this particular case, I have created a specific action plan, and if I go to this action plan, you see 3 tasks were created based on my template. So these are the actual action plans which are the instance, and this is my template which I created. In this you can see it has a due date. Now the second and the third action items are actually waiting for the first one to get complete. Once the first task is getting complete, then my second task will get triggered and then it will move to not started. So that dependency is something I have already configured in my action plan template, saying that the prerequisite for this second task is my first task. So you can create dependencies, you can set a reminder time, you can assign it to a specific user and so on. So there are a lot of this process you can basically create for a specific action plan and so on. And then you can give priority and so on. The user can also reorder it. So if they feel that the user who has been assigned this action plan, they think this order is not correct, they can also go and reorder this particular activity or task list, and they can change the task list based on their preferences or their needs here. And once this action plan is done, I mean all the tasks are completed, then this status will go to complete, and your action plan as a whole, that micro business process which I said, will get completed as a whole business process into the end-to-end business process there. So that's in a nutshell action plan. And I mean, yeah, I mean, it looks very simple, but to me, I think from a business point of view, you see, it's very powerful because it gives you that capability to cover those micro business processes in your end-to-end cycle. Okay, now let's move to the arc. Yeah, arc are actionable relationship centers, right? This is a visual way of giving you capability to show certain relationships, and it is very easy to navigate graph, easy to create, drag and drop, no code required. But again, this is very powerful in especially in certain cases of industry cloud solutions. Why? Because for example, in public sector, what happens is there are a lot of participants involved, and a user really needs to see an overview of which participant is involved in which case, what is the relationship with the participants, and that relationship view, right, that graph is not easily visualizable. Visualization is very difficult for a user, so he has to go into each record and see how those are related and what is the relationship between them. And arc basically gives that features and different capabilities by which you can basically relate each of the other elements. So this is how basically a typical arc looks like. So you start with an account on top, you see all the, I mean in this relationship you can see all the one-to-many relationship from the account. So you can see the related accounts, related contacts, and then within contact you can see what are the opportunities for Lily Smith here. So two level of relationships, you can basically go and see what are the different opportunities there. Each record you can have a link, you can click on that link and you can directly go to that particular record. So it is very easy to navigate across the records using this particular arc graph. You can also add certain actions here. So you can quickly say, okay, I want to create a new contact from here. So if you press new, you will go open a contact pop-up page. You can create a contact and that will be added. And very nice is that in this arc, I mean, you can configure it with your standard fields, but if you really want certain flexibility or look and feel has to be different for this particular node, you can also use flex pages here, which we saw in the start, right? So at a glance, if you want to show certain specific uh, data to the user, you can add a flex page here for a specific particular type of relationship, and you can modify the look and feel of that particular node here. So it's a bit flexible, but flex pages will need some work. But by default, you can basically create arc very easily. So let me just quickly show you an example of arc here. Yeah. So if you see, I just configured this particular arc which shows me account and all the contacts under my account. Okay, so I have two contacts, Tom Cruise and Donald Trump, under this accounting account. Okay, and certain specific fields I have selected in my arc graph which are shown here. What I can also do is I can disable the fields, so you don't see the fields, you only see the tree hierarchy. What you can also see is for the Donald Trump, what are the cases here. So I see that, okay, there is one case for Donald Trump here, and if I click on this hierarchy button, I will see that, okay, what are the different cases. I enable the fields, and you can see the different details of the different fields of that particular cases. I can also click on this link and go to that particular case, or from here from actions I can update the contact. Okay, and so on. So there are multiple actions which you can do. You can zoom in, zoom out of this particular graph if it is too complex. Okay, you can refresh it and so on, right? So I mean, from a visual perspective, I would say from an industry cloud perspective, this is a very good feature. But you need to adopt and show the value of this, right? Now I'll just quickly show you how to use this. It's very simple. If you go to the setup and you just search on Actionable Relationship Center, and you see these are some of the actionable relationship centers I just tested or created. So if I just open the first one which you just saw, you will basically get a graph builder. On this graph builder, it is very similar to the flows and even simpler to flows. You just need to start with your anchor object, which is account in my case. Then I added contact, which is one-to-many relationship, and from contact I added cases. So if there are any cases linked to the contacts, it will start showing it. On each component, you can just go on the right side and provide certain properties to it, how to display it, what are the different actions you want to add it, and so on, right? So here it says one-to-many relationship, what kind of node configuration you want, what are the filters you want on that particular context, that you only want to show specific contacts, you can filter it out. And from display perspective, you can either use a flex card, so you can enable this and add the flex card, or you can use standard fields from Salesforce, and those are there. So I mean, it is very simple to create. Within half day, you can just create this visualization view for your account and give a very simplistic tree structure view for a complex relationship into your industry domains and so on. So yeah, I think that's it. And actions, yeah, as I mentioned, you can add actions to your particular arc, and then those actions can be shown here on particular record. Yeah, you can also filter the objects based on certain criterias, and those objects will not be shown into your arc here. And I think that's my last slide. And yeah, we still have some time for Q&A. If someone has any questions, I think I'm happy to ask. I mean, you can ask, or we can also, you can put the questions and we can take it offline also, whatever is convenient.
All right, thank you, Anand. So it's a lot of content. It's very informative. And yeah, thanks for a very long presentation. Really, yeah, really liked it. Does anyone have any questions for Anand?
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Taji. I have a small question.
Mhm.
Thank you very much for this demo. It was very insightful and very helpful in understanding the OmniScript because I never worked on OmniScript, so this gives me a good start. I had a question like, is the OmniScript supports the autocomplete, or do we need to manually add that variable name? Because when you showed that data raptor and the data transformer, I guess, load. So that time we have to do the reverse mapping. So you showed, okay, you need to select the first block, then the second block, and then the variable name. Does it autocomplete? Because
Yeah,
that is really helpful. Not
yeah, that's a good question. So at some places, for example, in integration procedure, it does. So when you select the variables, it will list down all the variables which you need to select from there. But at some points, like the in the data raptor where I showed you that you need to map your account object fields to your OmniScript variables, right? That is where you need to define those variables manually, because at that point of time there is no context for OmniScript, right? And it's logical that it doesn't give you. But in IP, when you select those variables, you can basically select from a drop down there and then add it.
okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. But just remember, I think in OmniScript, I think yeah, you need to make sure that when you provide, that is why I said naming convention is really critical here. Because if you put naming convention, you know, okay, what naming convention you have provided, right? And that makes it easy to map those variables across components. Because sometimes if you don't use that naming convention, it will be very difficult to debug that, okay, for example, you have given a space, but at the second page you're not given a space, and then it doesn't match, and then you don't, I mean, it will be very hard for you to debug. So that's why I think the naming convention is really critical when you start on a project.
And is the formula also supports the autocomplete? Because
Yeah,
here the formula
yeah,
convention
yes, yes.
little different.
Formula, yes. You Once you start typing it, it will automatically give you the different variables which you want to use there.
Okay.
I see here also two questions in the chat. First one from Marie van Roekel. What skills and knowledge would you recommend for someone to have to work with the OmniStudio suite?
Yeah, I mean, if you see from knowledge and skill perspective, yeah, I mean, if you have worked on Salesforce, I don't see a blocker here. But what I would say is that from a UI perspective, I think you need to think really from a user interface perspective when you are designing your OmniScript, right? Because this is basically a UI tool, right, to create a custom screens or configurable screens for your business process. So if you are designing that correctly, and if you already have a UX designer or a functional analyst, I think from a technical point of view, you just need to understand how this whole modular structure works, how OmniStudio works, and that should be good for you. I don't think you need very specific knowledge or skill for creating or working on OmniScript or OmniStudio. I think it's very, once you understand this concept, right? I mean, it looks very lot of data, and I mean lot of components as I explained. But once you understand this concept and layered approach, right, this will start making sense to you, and it will really become very easy for you to work on this. So
Right. This is also another question from Chimaji Brajan. Pardon. Can we use ARC in an OmniStudio dev org, or do we need an industry cloud trial org to explore it?
yeah, so I mean, if you want to explore it, you can request an industry cloud trial from your from the Salesforce. Ideally, OmniStudio is not available on the dev org. So from, I mean, a normal Trailhead dev org, it is not available. You have to specifically request for it. But if you request a specific industry cloud, I think you will get automatically the OmniStudio to play around.
There's also a question from San. Is there provision to write unit test cases for OmniScripts? So I think he means that is it possible and is it required to do it?
No, I mean, from provision perspective, see, the tool gives you the capability to do your unit testing, right? Now it is up to you what different scenarios you want to test it. For example, I tested only for one account ID. if in your unit test scenarios you have different, I mean, you need to write your unit test scenarios outside your tool, and based on those unit test scenarios you need to basically test it using those tools, right? I mean, tool is not going to provide you test cases. For test cases you need to use there are other tools to write it, but yeah, not OmniStudio as such. But yeah, of course, I mean, these tools are really helpful to do those unit testing for your OmniScripts. So I also see that my experience is comfortable with JSON and XML. Yeah, indeed. I mean, as I said, yeah, JSON could be one, but I think understanding JSON is not very difficult, right? I mean, it's very, I mean, for me, it was very simple to learn JSON. I mean, there's nothing complex to learn in JSON as such. Okay, are there any significant
Yeah, so another question from Konstantin. So are there any significant differences in media, communications, and energy cloud solutions if they're part of the same package?
Yeah, I mean, so that's specifically industry cloud question. I mean, see, media, communication, energy are three different types of industries, right? Communication is specifically focusing on telcos or telecom companies. Okay, energy clouds are the companies which are providing you energies and electricity and oils and so on, right? And media is media. But having said that, I mean, from an industry perspective, you see there are a lot of companies which are actually working in all these three. Okay, but from Salesforce industry perspective, they have segregated it because there are a lot of companies which are primarily working on these domains, right? So I mean, it doesn't make sense to have a monolithic industry cloud solution for them. If there is a company which is part of all these three domains, I mean, yeah, they can very well use three industry clouds there.
And you can use multiple industry clouds in the same org, right?
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for Anand?
What is the best way to debug the OmniScript? It is individual level, like if there is a very complex OmniScript and the developer have not worked on that before on that particular OmniScript. So what you advise him or her to start debugging?
Yeah, so there you need to really debug individual components, because I said in individual components you can give a request and then see what is the response, and based on that you can go step by step and see where actually at what step you are failing. Because even when you're running your OmniScript, right, you will know that okay, whether it is failing at step 4 or at the end of the step, you will at least know at what step it is failing, and then from there you can start that okay, the previous step, what is the data I provided, what is the output. And I think, as I mentioned, right, the first thing to check, I mean, in your higher org is, of course, if your latest version is active. Then the second thing you need to check is if your variables are mapped correctly from your previous step to next step, and then if your data raptors is also mapped correctly. I think those are some of the things you need to check first, and then you can go step by step into your OmniScript to debug your issue there.
Okay, thanks for your input.
No worries.
All right. Any last questions? Guess not. All right, then Anand, I really want to thank you for your amazing presentation. Also glad we could record it.